In 2022, I tracked at least 40 books I've read this year. And I know compared to a lot of other to a lot of other people, that doesn't seem like a lot, but for me, it is a lot. There's always a possibility that I forget to log one or two, but I like that the number is even, so we're keeping it at 40. I beat my goal somehow, and it seems like I only read 10 last year. I don't know how that's possible, but it helps that I bring the books with me to work so I can read on my break and I can read in bed. So I have some stats here. The four oldest books that I've read: Oath of Swords from 1995, Vengeance and Death from 1997, Magic the Gathering Whispering Woods from 1994, and Redwall, the oldest, at 1986. And I've read 15,200 and something pages, 6 5-star reads, 11 4-star reads, 9 3-star reads, 9 2-star reads, 5 1-star reads. I'm glad that that's the lowest number. And people always say, oh, why do you read books you don't like? Because obviously I don't know if I'm going to like them until I read them. I've read books that I thought I'd like and they turn out terrible. And then I've done the opposite too, where I've read books that sounded stupid and end up being actually pretty good. And I like to change genres sometimes, so it's not just all of one, all fantasy or whatever, so I don't get bored. I need to refresh by just switching genres. The longest was Stephen King's Fairy Tale at 608 pages. The shortest was a graphic novel, Victor and Nora, at 200 pages, which is still pretty long, but I don't really want to add graphic novels to a list of books. I've read so many comic books that you don't even know about. Like, I have a whole bookshelf like this dedicated just to graphic novels and comic books. DC only though, no Marvel. Get that right. So, I guess let's start with the 5-star books. This would be the best. The best of the best. And I'm going to start with An Enchantment of Ravens. It's an interesting concept of the classic Fae genre, where humans trade their crafts for enchantments given to them by the Fae. It's a very clever premise, and I love the characters of this book. I loved Isabel and Rook, along with the whole autumn atmosphere of just traveling through the forest and into the Fae realm. And the title actually has a lot to do with the premise, and I don't want to spoil it, but it was actually pretty clever how it's tied into, and I love that. I don't want to spoil it, but like I said, I love everything about it. Next we have One Dark Window. Seems to me like a lot of people didn't find this as good as I did. But then again, I'm a huge fan of tarot, if this isn't obvious by some of my other videos. It felt more like an adult book to me just because of the pressure and the atmosphere. There's a dark mystery at hand here in the book. It's just so fun to see that each card and the power that each one has, and to find out which person is carrying what card and how you need to gather them all, and then even the story behind it, the dark legend of it, and then this mystery monster in the background. Like, it's a real, there's this overlooming like feeling of danger all the time, and I really enjoyed it. I even did a tarot reading just for her, the main character. So I want to know why some people didn't enjoy it as much as I did. I thought the concept was pretty original. Even though I know there are only 12 cards and not 72, but you can't really make a book around that, so this is perfect for me. And okay, now we have The Shadow of the Gods. Looking back now, I think I fell into the hype for this book. Because if I had to go back and rate it again, I might actually have dropped it to a 4. Like, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the adventure aspect of of a classic fantasy novel. Like, it's we're out there, we have a quest, let's go do it. But I kept waiting to see this huge reveal of this god that they kept like foreshadowing in the background, of this dragon. And most of it is actually just following 3 different characters about whose paths eventually intertwine, like towards the end, before we even get to any of that other stuff. So we have 3 different characters and their lives basically, switch from one to the other throughout the book. Also, I had trouble reading it for too long. Like, I don't know why, but I can only handle a little bit of it at a time. Like, it was a strong book. I think I was just really excited to get back into the long adventure books, with the tales and the. So we don't get very many of those anymore. Some people say that they didn't even like the second book as much as the first. So if I didn't like the first as much as I thought I would, should I even bother reading the second? Next up is Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I recently raved about this one too. There's not much to say about it besides that it's perfect. And it's not even his own genre. The character development, along with the mix of the perfect world building, like that's what I want. Lately, there's only been too much of one or the other. There's been too much character focus and not enough story focus. But this is like the perfect mix between two, even if it's 600 pages. The ending was a bit like whatever. I just breezed through it because I don't know. I think I was just unhappy that it was ending, period. So no matter what ending happened, I probably wouldn't have been satisfied with it. Aside from that, I also read the whole Noble Dead saga. Now, I didn't individually rate each one 5 stars. They each have their own rating. But I'm not going to list every single book when it comes up in the series. So I'm going to group them all right here into one series. I read it like as a little bit of a book club. So I would read one, they would read one, and then we would talk about it. And the first one in the series is Dampier. Just know that I greatly enjoyed reading a book that's, less known, but is still a treasure. It felt like its own world, like it's not trying to pander to anything or try too hard, because it's not worried about being in the, top reader list or whatever. It's actually a husband and a wife who wrote these books together. And for some reason, that just like really intrigues me. How does that happen? Does one person write the book and the other one just give ideas? Or do they switch writing on and off? Which wouldn't make sense to me because I feel like your writing style would change. I don't know. Or just like one person write one character and the other one write another character. Because there is a lot of point of view switching in this book. I don't know, just something to wonder. I need more books like these, okay? So real quick, I'm just going to summarize it. It's about a half vampire, half human hybrid who teams up with a half elf who fakes like they hunt vampires to get by. It starts off pretty comically, but it's actually the whole series is actually pretty serious. They have a plan to settle down in a town and open up an inn. They're not like together, but there's this whole will they, won't they kind of in the background, and they get tangled up in fighting actual vampires. When people start showing up dead, and people think that they're actually vampire hunters, right? So, and then as we go on, we start uncovering more secrets about each of their heritages, and it turns into this epic quest around the world where we have to gather certain magical items to stop the world from being destroyed from vampires. And it's just a fun read. The only issue I have is there are several times when the parties get separated during the quest. And I don't even mean like the main group. Like this book has a habit of one group who, usually the evil group, is trying to follow the main group to stop them. Whatever we find out in the main group is like often repeated when we switch to the other point of view and they catch up to this point. And then we get the same information again and again. So that tires me out a little bit. But I can withstand that for the rest of the series because I really wanted to know, and the fight scenes were just on point. So that's all for the 5 stars. Let's go down to 4 stars. These are books that I still really, really loved, but I just couldn't say they were perfect. And I'm starting to notice a pattern. I really enjoy fantastical elements that rely on like a fairy tale background, like One Dark Window, Fairy Tale, Enchantment of Raven, and now we have The Bear and the Nightingale. And I honestly can't even remember why this isn't a 5 star because I enjoyed it so much. It's about this young girl who lives in the wilderness of Russia, like Siberia or something like that. And they're right on the border of these mystical woods that people respect and kind of don't go into because it's well known that there's demons and spirits and whatnot. They're traditional, and they're traditional ways. They honor the spirits and the demons and whatever, and as long as they keep honoring them, they're left alone to live their life. And there's one above all the others. They call him the Frost. He's basically winter personified. All the fairy tales have a legend. Think of like The Witcher, Game of Thrones. They all have a Frost King that is out there. So when their father brings home a new stepmother, she's someone who's been raised to abandon the old traditional ways and take up the more modern religious ways, like with the churches and whatnot. She pretty much bans the family from honoring the spirits. And once that happens, a little bit starts happening at a time that starts getting slowly worse and worse over time to where, you start to realize they're being haunted but they question it. Like, is it truly the spirits because we've been punished, or is it just nature? It's an interesting concept between the struggle between old traditions and the new, and it does kind of drag on a little bit. But overall, I mean, it's a good story, and that's what I like about books. I like the stories. Moving on to Oath of Swords. When I think about wanting just a simple fantasy adventure read, this is the book. This is the book of the year for that. It follows Bazel and Brandark, a pair of fox-eared paladin warriors who get caught up in the crosshairs of a mad prince, and even the gods eventually. You can tell it's dated though, but if you just want like a classic fantasy element, then it's a good piece of adventure. Next up, Violet Made of Thorns. I loved it. Y'all know I loved it. It's another one based on fairy tales, and we have an extreme morally gray character here. People who are especially looking for a lot of drama and spice in romance will especially be interested in this one. It's the epitome of love-hate. I think the romance plays a big part of it. Violet trying to open herself and in her skills as a seer, and trying to overcome her ability to control every single outcome. So, Victor and Nora, Gotham love story. Believe me when I say I didn't even want to include this one. But if I didn't, I know y'all sit there and count every single book and be like, wait, you're missing one. I don't know if it's obvious, but Nightwing is my favorite DC character. You know, my that Dick Grayson. I'm talking about the whole of it. I read The Lost Circus as a fan, and I hated it. But I read this, and I absolutely love it. What? The art is very nice. It keeps both of them painted in their own splash of colors. So like when he talks it's blue, when she talks it's red. So you have this concept of fire and ice and the warmth and the distance. And I think it helps because Mr. Freeze's whole reason of becoming a villain in the first place is because of what happened to his wife. Everybody knows Mr. Freeze's basic backstory. And we know there's a tragic outcome already to this love story. That's what makes it even more sad. Also, unlike Dick Grayson, there's not as much background to Mr. Freeze. So you don't have this huge pressure on having to write them right and canonically right. Next, we have A Dowry of Blood. I honestly had no idea what I expected when I went into this, but it turned out to be way better than I thought. It's done in this interesting point of view that we follow somebody who's literally just been turned into a vampire, and the story starts there, as written like a journal. And then she trained. Anyway, and then she basically spends the rest of her life explaining to us how he basically owned her the rest of her unnatural life. The yearning for life and just to be able to feel again. The emotions that vampires don't have and the extreme gaslighting coming from her partner. It's not a light read and you have to pay attention between the lines. It's an adult book like it was meant to be. But when it gets hot, it does get really hot. I'll give it that. Redwall! So this is purely nostalgic for me. I was determined, ever since I read it as a little kid, the concept to me is just so original. I mean, who comes up with something like this? You got a bunch of little animals, and they're warriors, they're monks, they're fighting each other. You got badgers, you got rabbits, you got squirrels, you got weasels, and they're all, you know? I mean, of course they have animal books, you know, but nothing at a scale of adventure like this. I remember just going through high school, and every time I'd go into the library, I would find another one of these books. And back then, I had no, grasp on the concept of volumes and the order of reading. I just saw, another one, and I would read it. I've been wanting to see if it holds up, even now, reading it. So I was a little bit afraid, because I didn't want to lose that nostalgia that I had for it. But I feel like it is still a fun read. And surprisingly, there's a lot of gore in this book. Like, people die left and right, like in a children's book. So I think it still holds up, especially from 1986. The Song of Achilles. With this one, I had this distinct feeling that I was being unloyal to the original piece that this was based off of. And I feel that way when I read a lot of retellings. Does that make any sense? I don't even know how to categorize this book. It's either fantasy, historical fantasy, romance, with a little bit of action. And the romance is the strongest part. Like, if you call it a romance book, then it's definitely at its strongest. The way Patroclus describes his feelings for Achilles. It's a great book when you want to think about the concept of a relationship between gods and humans, because you know it's just fated to fail from the start. You have the whole immortality thing and just being on a whole different level. It does get slowed down a lot by the outside stuff, and so don't get me wrong, it's not a bad book. I enjoyed it as it was just the relationship and not the actual setting, which is strange because me loving that kind of stuff. I don't know, it was really sweet to see the way that Patroclus admires Achilles does and wants to know how he doesn't understand how perfect he is. When Achilles just latches on to attention, from a human who adores him and is able to live like this normal life without the pressure of being a god. It's a really sweet relationship. But it's fated to fail. So there's that. Okay, Belladonna. Now I know this is a hard choice. People have been hard on this one, and they blow things wildly out of proportion, like they usually do. Our main character might be my biggest problem with this book. I love the idea of the rest of it, someone who can't die, being in love with death, and living on both sides of the world. There's a mysterious poison going on in the background that we're meant to solve, but it keeps being interrupted by this society business. It's meant to show us the struggles of fitting in with another class, and I get that, but it doesn't really need to be drug out that much. That's the common pattern I find in a lot of these books that I like, or I like the idea of, and execution. It's just that they usually get interrupted by something going on the side that's not completely necessary. Next, The Daughter of Redwinter. It was so focused on Rain's character. It's the opposite of the other ones. This time, we don't get to see much exploration of the world on the outside. It starts off in this amazing action-like setting where you're holed up in a fortress and you're staving off with these magical warriors, and she has the secret about being able to see the dead, which is not a spoiler, by the way. And you think, wow, this is going to be interesting. How is this going to come into play? Except that it almost never does. That one action fantasy saga kind of ends about a fifth of the way into the book, when it lays out the background and she starts moving to another location. Most of it becomes a training book, but it's not really training. It's more like an academy book set up in like an old oriental-like setting, where you have monks and I don't know. So it's more focused, not really. She doesn't really get the training that you think she would get. She gets pushed to the side a lot because they don't even trust her. And it focuses on her relationship with another girl on the team, which was very nice because she starts gaining more allies. But the whole actual plot of it and the mystical aspect starts feeling like a plot B. So The Photographer. This is another fiction book, and we have the point of view of a villain, which is really interesting. She's obsessive, manipulative, ambitious, probably sociopathic, and definitely a liar. I mean, you watch through her eyes, as every interaction she does to help people is only to serve herself. But she doesn't have any feelings about it. She just does it. She relishes attention, especially with the men. It's a wild ride, and a photographer is a great career choice for her because she gets to see the life of people through a lens, and she can actually distort that by making life seem different just depending on what kind of picture you take. Okay, let's move on to 2-star reads. Meaning, I didn't hate it, but it was okay. Magic the Gathering, Whispering Woods. It's lucky to be this high. The reason this gets a pass is mostly for its time period that it was written in. But unfortunately, like most video game movies, it doesn't translate well to another media. A villager gets roped into traveling with a wizard and his caravan of traveling bands, and they get drawn up in having duels with other wizards to gain power. And I like the characters at the core, who they are and their personalities. The action was the worst of it all. It just went by way too fast, and you have too many repeated attacks. And it just it was almost kind of like Yu-Gi-Oh, where they just throw off cards at random and until one basically wins. I found myself skimming towards the end, and I literally never do that. Next, Shaman's Crossing. I should have loved this book, but the cover and It was a bit misleading to me, and it angered me. This book is 600 pages, okay? So we go through every single detail of Navarre's life, from him being like a toddler up to the moment when he's training in the academy to be a soldier. And there's this struggle to deny his traditional way and his non-traditional way. And don't get me wrong, he is unlikable as a character, but I enjoy reading those kind of characters because it's relatable and it's human. But sometimes even just the smallest details drag out for pages about one topic just to be never brought up again. It just took way too long to get through the point of the story, but the writing is really good. There's just almost no magic in it, like it was promised, except for the occasional dream or something and then he just denies it. The Court of Miracles, for some reason that I can't really explain, right about a fourth of the way in, I just lost interest, which is weird because when I was started reading it, I was so hyped for it. I was flipping the pages and I was like, ooh, a map. Ooh, we have all these sigils of all these different guilds, and it's gonna come into play. But if it's so good, then why has no one else talked about it? And then I found out when I just kept reading. First, it does lure us in with this, where they introduce all the different guilds and what they do, and when she gets brought into the underworld, as we say, underground, let's call it that. But then after that, it's like, okay, we got that out of the way. Now let's do some more character stuff. And it's more historical fiction than fantasy because it's based on a real life historical event and kind of takes place in the actual world. So nothing too crazy can actually happen. There's no magic or anything like that. You just got criminals doing stuff. You have a girl who's a thief in a depressing state of time when there's like oppression from royalty, and it's in France. I guess I got excited when I first started reading it thinking it was going to be another fantasy book, but it's not. It's just a fiction book. Wild is the Witch. I have not been enjoying this trend of witchy YA books. I think they take advantage that most of the people who actually read these have nothing to do with the witchcraft, don't know anything about it, or just for people who like the aesthetic. This one is really good if you're looking for someone who has a tie to nature, and it's a reminder to be true to yourself. But in the end, I felt like it was meant to be a romance book, but it's just disguised as a fantasy. And I liked the dialogue. A lot of people didn't. I liked it. Some people felt it was a little unrealistic, but I think that's okay for a fiction story. But I do question some of our characters' choices. They didn't make the wisest ones. Like, the whole thing could have been prevented. Next up is The Drowned Woods. And I should have enjoyed this one more too. Because I especially love people that have water powers and when the water get involved. I love the concept of Scotland and the Fae. But unfortunately, it spent too much effort on trying to make our main character to be this coolest one that can do everything that the other members could do, to the point where the other members weren't even needed anymore because she could just do everything. And later on, it soon became about this random thieves guild that she was also involved in, on top of everything else, and her ex. And it became mostly about those two trying to rehash their past while trying to save an impending doom in the background. I think too much of it was thrown into one book when it should have just focused on the main thing at hand. But I liked the characters. I just didn't like the situations that the characters were in. They didn't have enough time to do anything. Some people even died before I was even certain which one it was. And Our Crooked Hearts. What do you know? Another one of those witchy YA books. And this one I think plays even more on the concept of readers not really knowing the secret of it. It's about 3 girls who have a special bond in high school. They think they want to stand out more and kind of feel like they have a place in the world, so they pick up witchcraft to feel more powerful. And then one of them gets really addicted to it, and they all grow up, and they have a secret. And the secret gets found out by the daughter, who is our main point of view. And everything is kept from her for the whole book. She steadily tries to figure it out on her own, and she knows nothing about anything spiritual, witchcrafty, or anything like that. It's 100% naive. I think we made it to the Lost Carnival. Dick just has too much history to him. It's too hard to try and go backwards and fill in some of that mystery time from between when he got to Bruce. Because even in this novel, he's a lot older than what we think he when he got to Bruce. And I know fans do want to see more about him before his life with Bruce and what he did, and that's what I thought this was gonna be. But instead, it's completely about an original character, and Dick actually just ends up feeling like an insert or like a cameo name drop. It's her story. It's not even his story. And finally, the 1-star reviews. Oh boy, I bet this is what y'all came to see. Vengeance and Death. This is probably one of the worst procedural cop books that I've ever seen. Borderline hilarious. It's like a B-rate cop movie. We have an attempt to make a strong female cop who ends up actually being just a bitchy lady, bitchy woman. She was my biggest problem. The way she talks sounds like one of those old jaded guys in every cop movie. It's like, just stop trying to look cool already. I couldn't even finish this. It was horrible. It was awful. Move on. 15 seconds. Yeah, I tried to read this book twice, and I finally decided I can't get through it. The summary sounds like an exciting action movie, right? A guy gets pulled over one day, he gets arrested for some random reason, and then one of the cops suddenly end up dead, and then he's on the run for like the rest of the book for misunderstanding that he killed the cop. And meanwhile, he's trying to call people for help and find out that one of them is betraying him or something like that. I don't even know. It was just bad, okay? It was bad. Get a load of this title. The Goddess and the Shaman. Wait, the Art and Science of Magical Healing. I was hoping actually to get insight from this. It's not a fiction book, it's not a fantasy. It was supposed to be one of those enlightening books, that it's supposed to expand your mind a little. Okay, let's just say that. But what we got here was like a journal, the Source Riddle Journal, bragging about stuff that sounds made up. Don't get me wrong, I'm open-minded about a lot of things, but not when it comes to like psychics, who try to scam people out of their money, things like that. I can't help but feel like I'm being sold something. This person is having so many new experiences in such a short life. It's like, how is it possible? It's like a phase that's imagined every time they learn something new. It's one thing to be like a skeptic about magic, but she starts talking about refusing the help of doctors so that she can heal the person with her hands instead. And then charge those people, for that. And she tries to say she makes a living service off of that. And also, talking to ghosts about where they lost diamond rings, and then she talks to animals for people, and they talk back to her. I'm sorry, but it sounds a little bit scammy to me. A lot of things are possible, but this is not possible. I do not appreciate trying to sell people something that's just not possible. And I get what they say when it's all about perception and how you perceive people, but this is a long way around that. You can explain it as you talked to the animal, and then you sat there and you concentrated and you tried to imagine how they felt and what they would say to you. Not straight up say that you talk to the dog and the dog talks back to you. No. Next up is A Broken Blade. And oh my god, I ragged so hard on this one. It's supposed to be an adult book, but it reads like YA. It's just a little bit edgier because it deals with topics like self-harm and alcohol abuse, but it's still just ticking all those political boxes out there. It's just pandering. Everything I said in my review, I still stand by. Kira, our character, is angsty and great at everything. It's kind of annoying, and I have to stop before I go on a rampage about this one too, but just take my word for it. Next we have The Goddess of Nothing at All. I feel bad because I got this book for free. The tension was off for a book about Norse gods. For those who don't know, this is about Loki's wife, who in the legends is hardly mentioned. Like, at all, except for like one mention. She holds the bowl, the venom to stop dripping on Loki for a little while. So that's where the cover comes from. So this is basically just retelling all of Loki's tales with just her as a female protagonist in his place. And it turns into this strange romance book. But it's one of those like, oh, he's so vulnerable and misunderstood, I can fix him, and tries to show him in a more private light. I believe some people would call this like womp. There's lots of hugging and snuggling and comforting. There's a lot of like Loki's wife telling Loki that he looks amazing transformed as a woman to make him feel comfortable in his own skin. And it feels like it's just a message to give to the readers to try to tell you that it's okay. And like, I appreciate that. I don't want it to find a hidden message. I mean, it's okay if you want to read a book about that, but if you're just trying to read a fiction fantasy book, why do you need to put those kind of messages in it? I just wanted to read a badass Norse story, and I don't know what this is at all. It's like a fan fiction. So now that's my list, and it's all done. It's time to move into the new year. I'm cutting back on the book boxes because I already have so many books that I haven't read yet, and my bookshelves are filling up to the max. I'm out of room, and I hardly ever use the stuff that they send me, even though I really like getting it. And I'm going to try not to let myself fall into more YA trap. And I'm sure I forgot a book or two here or there, but it'll be okay. So, Happy New Year's, and let's go into 2023.